Hello, this video deals with part 2 of the overview of the 10 classes of verbs in Sanskrit. The previous one we dealt with what's called the thematic a conjugation, where each form of the verb has the a between the root and the stem. There's classes 1, 4, 6 and 10. Here we deal with the others, which is everything else. We will turn now to, let me get my, call up my, so I'm going to be calling up my iPad. Come on, iPad. There we are. We go on to what we call class 2, which is the ad class. Panini call it the ad class. So class 2, ad, we cognate with our word to eat, in the Latin edere. Sorry, I failed to share a screen there. What's gone wrong here? Oh well. Sorry, I don't know where that's lost off the top. I will now take you to MacDonnell with his second class. By the way, he's used dvish here. They're both class 2 verbs, class 2 roots, no, class 2 verbs. The reason that MacDonnell has used the root dvish rather than ad as the paradigm is simply because dvish better illustrates the sandhi between the root and the ending. A characteristic of this class, ignore it's the second conjugation there, we're looking at a second class now. A characteristic of this class, the dvish class, it's called the dvishadi guna. Oh, yeah, sorry, it's called the adadi guna, because Panini uses the ad root, adadi guna. Class 2 we call it, is that the endings, the same endings as for the previous conjugation, the mi, si, ti, and so on, ma, ta, ante, all the endings, same endings, but they're just added straight onto the root without any intervening vowel or infix. You will also note, and this is an important point, note in particular this, that in this text boxes are drawn round certain of the verb forms. In the imperative, a box is drawn round, and in the so it's the third class now. So in the present, in the imperfect, certain parts of the imperative, but not for the optative at all, boxes are drawn around certain forms. And you'll notice that in all of those forms where there's a box round it, there is a guna of the root vowel. So dvish gune to dveshmi, dvekshi, dveshti. By normal sandhi, dveshsi has become dvekshi. That's normal sandhi. Whereas in the others, it's not gunated. Dvishvah, dvishmah, dvishe, dvishvahe, dvishmahe, and so on. Again, that is related to the point we made in relation to class 1 as opposed to class 6 verbs. It's related to where the stress or the pitch fell in Vedic. The stress in Vedic fell for these particular forms of the verb on the root, whereas in the other forms of the verb, it fell on the ending. So dveshmi, note the stress, dveshmi, but dveshva. Macdonald very helpfully here puts a stress mark, that acute accent, nothing to do with long and short, it's purely stress, as to, that just to indicate where the stress was. And you'll see, sure enough, wherever you get the gunated form dveshmi, the stress mark is on it. Dveshmi, dvekshi, dveshti, but dvishva, dvishta, dvishta, and so on. And similarly for various forms throughout the imperfect and the imperative. So when you're looking at, for these purposes, I said we just look at the third singular parasmaipada and third singular atmanepada. For the moment, just look at dveshti and dvishte. So dvish, how is it conjugated? You don't need to go through every single bit. It's conjugated dveshti and dvishte. Once you've got dveshti, dvishte, then everything else falls into place once you've got those two. Again, back rather like our Latin principal parts of the verb. So that basically is what happens with the second conjugation. The roots, the endings join straight onto the root, with or without gunation, depending on stress. You have to apply sandhi. So, for example, the ending ti becomes a ta, subdotted after the sh, dveshti. Similarly, all the others that end in where the ending begins with a ta, dvishta, and so on. Now, let us proceed to class 3. Now, in case you were put off by, how are you going to remember where the stressed ones were and where the unstressed ones were, where the boxes are, the good news is that throughout the whole of the second conjugation, that's these classes 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, these boxes are all in the same place for all of those second conjugation classes. So if you look at the third class, okay, we'll go on to third class now, and it's called the hu, because the root hu class, so that becomes the havadi, the hu adi, havadi gana, it's called. So hu meaning to sacrifice. So what happens here? What happens here is that we have a reduplication of the first, reduplication of the first syllable. And the reduplicates with the j. There are separate rules of reduplication that are given earlier in the book. There are standard rules. Some standard rules which are given under Macdonald section 129. I won't go into the detail of that here because this is just a very broad overview, but just remember that, for example, things like k and g are reduplicated with a ch and a j. The h is also reduplicated with a j. And the vowel of the root is reduplicated. So it's the basic vowel is the u. So it's ju, juhomi, juhoshi, juhoti. You do not, but you get a gunation of that root vowel in the stressed forms, but not in the unstressed forms, which is why you get juhuti, but juhute. And again, if you know juhuti, juhute, then as usual, everything else will fall into place. Sorry, I can't remember whether I was hiding my iPad when I did that last one. So I lost it again. So here we are. So that's the what we call the third class, the hu class. So the hu adi gana, huadi gana. We now jump to the seventh. The reason I'm not, we've done the fourth, of course, that's an class verb. The fifth and the eighth we will do together for reasons that you will see very soon. So we'll now go to class 7. And class 7 is the rud. Seven. So that is the rudhadigana. It's the same rud, for example, in our word nirodha, cessation. Rud basically means to block or to stop or to prevent something. Nirodha, if everything is blocked or stopped off. So what happens with this class is that I will turn up Macdonell again. So I keep losing things on my screen. Here we are. Seventh, here we are, Rud. What happens in the Rud class is that we get na in the stressed forms, otherwise known as the strong form. Macdonell, other grammarians call them the strong, the weak forms. That's the thing of the stressed and unstressed. These are just words you give them. So this lot here in this box, you can either call it strong or stressed, and the others are weak or unstressed. So in the strong / stressed form, you add in this infix na, and in the weak unstressed form, it's not na, it's just the n on its own. So rundva, rundha, and so on. Rundhanti, atmanipala, rundhe. So let me call up the iPad again. It's still mucking me about this damn thing. Don't know why it's doing this. So you get rud, and for the stressed or strong forms, we have to add in a na. So you get the ru, na, and of course by standard Santi, it's a subdotted n. So it's runa, me. So what have you got? You've got rud. You have to infix a na. I was going to put a stress mark there. So you get ru, na, d. Strong base, runad, and there you get the runadmi. You have to apply internal santi. You can't have runadsi. That has to become runatsi. So you stop. And where you add a t to the end, we all know what happens with the followed by a t ending. It becomes a double dh, as in buddha is Buddha. Similarly here, runadti becomes runadti. This is actually a perfectly regular formation within Sandhi. And that's for the stressed forms. For the unstressed, or otherwise known as the weak forms, is you add in not the na, but just simple n on its own. So, for example, rund plus te by Santi becomes rundhe. Rundte, rundhe. Let me call back. There we see in the strong forms here, the na added throughout. In the weak forms, just the n on its own. Atmanepada, rundhe. As before, once you've got runadhi, rundhe, everything else falls into place. We will now deal with the 5th class. And we can deal with the 5th class and the 8th class pretty much in the same breath. So 5, and the paradigm root of this is su, meaning to press out, as in to squeeze out juice and that kind of thing. And that, of course, is called the su adi gana, su, etc. form, so which becomes the swadi gana. Now, sorry, I should have been showing you my iPad screen there, which as usual has done a disappearing act on me again. Come on, here we are. No. Here we are. Swadi gana, sorry. The characteristic of the 5th class is that it adds in this infix no into the root before the endings. No in the stressed forms, and in the unstressed or weak forms it's u. There were the initial parts as sunu, sunu. So sunuti and atmanepada sunute. Note here, although we aren't dealing with the endings in detail here, just note in passing, look at sunu anti, it comes of course by santi, sunvanti, so the u becomes a v. And similarly before the endings that begin with a vowel. In fact, in the parasmaipada, it's most of them in the present tense. Sunuvahe, sunvate, sunvate, and so on. And you'll notice, as with the others, that the pattern of distribution of the weak and the strong, the weak, that is the stressed and the unstressed, are exactly the same as the other classes. You know, these boxes are all in the same place in relation to all of the verb forms. So just going back to iPad now, here we are. So su nomi so let's put sunoti because we're just dealing with the first third person. Sunoti, sunute. Notice here I've put the stress marks here, which normally we wouldn't do when writing Sanskrit or Pali, just to remind you that that's the reason why we get these differing forms. Sunoti, sunute. We're just writing regular, ordinary Sanskrit. We write it without any mark. Sunoti, sunute. We go now to the, so that's the insertion of this no or nu. We now go to class 8. Su is class 5. We now go to class 8, which is called the tan class. That's the Tanadigana. The tan class actually looks exactly the same as the su class, because all of the, with one exception of kr, which is a slight oddity, with that one exception, all of the members of this class end in the letter N, and they add the O. So you got tanoti and tanute. So when they conjugate, if you didn't happen to know, look, sunoti, sunte, tanoti, tanute, which class do they belong to? Well, from looking just at these forms of the verb, you wouldn't know. That's why you can lump them together. It's that the tan class, with the exception of crit, I'll deal with in a moment, the tan class has already got the N that the su class adds in. Otherwise, they are identical. The verb kri is a little bit of an outlier, slightly irregular. It makes its strong stem in karo, so you get karoti, and its weak stem in kuru. So the Atmanipada form is kurute. As an aside for Pali learners, many of the apparent weirdnesses of this verb in Pali are directly referable. Virtually all of them, I think, if not actually all of them, are directly referable to the fact that this verb is a class 8 verb in Sanskrit and behaves as a class 8 verb should, and then with phonetic mutations you get these what look like complete wild oddities in Pali, but in fact are perfectly regular if you trace it back to the Sanskrit. So that deals with classes 5 and 8, and finally we will look at class 9. Cool. I mean, you'll see that MacDonnell doesn't bother to give a separate set of paradigms for classes 5, and he gives you class 5, but he doesn't bother with class 8 for exactly the reason I said, because because they behave in exactly the same way, like tanome, tanoshi, tanoti, tanute, and so on. So 7th class we've just done. Okay, and the 9th class, which is the last class we'll be looking at now, because we've already done number 10, the chur class, churayati. What happens, this is the kri class, to buy, kri, and this is the kri adi gana, which by becomes the kriyadi gana. So just as in the 5th class, the su class, you have the infixes no and nu. sunoti, sunute. Here you add na in the strong forms and ni in the weak forms. So infix na or ni. And of course with the usual subdotting, cerebralization by the normal rules of Sandhi, followed by a r, which is why I get krinati. And again note, strong forms and weak forms, they're exactly the same pattern as in all of the other second conjugation verbs. So you get kri, na, ti, and kri, ni, te, krinati, krinite. And as usual, once you've got those two, if anyone says to you, this verb sounds like krinati, krinite, what class it, you immediately know it's a 9th class verb with the infix na changing to ni in the weak form. And as usual, once you've got those, the rest of them will fall into place. It's simply a question of learning the endings, which are, broadly speaking, uniform throughout the entire present system. I'm sorry, I have a feeling I might have been forgetfully hiding my iPad for a bit there. The kri, I was writing kri, kriadigana, krina, krini, krinati, krinite. What I could do, again, is just put the stress mark there to indicate krinati, krinite. And I do emphasize when we're reciting Sanskrit now, we wouldn't put that stress mark. Just be aware of that's where it was, which explains these differences. So that concludes this video on the 10 classes of verbs. And again, please do bear in mind that which class a verb belongs in affects only these 4 tenses and moods that are shown in the paradigm here in MacDonnell: present, imperfect, imperative, and optative. It's got nothing to do with the formation of verbal nouns, nothing to do with the formation of the passive or the past participle or the future passive participle or the aorist or the future. These are formed according to separate rules. The only thing you should remember is that the present participle is formed on the basis of the present stem. So, for example, what's happened here? Come on. I don't know what's happened here. Anyway, the present participle is formed from the third person plural. You can make it of the present stem. So kri, let's just take this one. I might shift it. I don't know what's happened. So, for example, the present participle from kri to buy. Look at this kri. I've even got the imperative here, so it's just not giving me the page I want. Anyway, if it krinanti we've just seen is the third person plural present krinanti, and very regularly that is the stem for the present participle krinant. So krinan, krinantam, krinatah, and so on. So that, remember, the present participle is formed off the present stem, unlike the future passive participle and the past participle. So there we are. That concludes this slightly chopped about lesson on the 10 classes of verbs in Sanskrit. and I shall now proceed to go through the Pali material and, as it were, map it on to those 10 classes.